level perspective on what appears to be a haphazard zigzag pattern of progress and retreat. Our goal is to take a close look at progress narratives and civilizational learning and to understand if we can discern a greater historical direction beyond the turbulence of this moment for global society. And we come to an understanding which can temper the growing confusion and despair resulting from the recent retreat? And can we help shift our focus to how we can complete the progress to the next stage of social evolution, which meets with resistance, as we know, at this point in time? From my evolutionary social science perspective, growth and transformation processes in both individual and collective development are typically painstaking and often quite turbulent, involving two parallel and seemingly mutually contradictory tendencies. One is the deepening untenability of an old worldview, which causes it to retreat into a defensive stance. The other is the arduous emergence of a new level of understanding, which embraces earlier levels into a more comprehensive, more fully integrated and adaptive system. Of course, this process is extremely difficult, as I just mentioned, arduous, both in individual and in the collective development of consciousness, which has been my focus of study for many years. And nonetheless, as you can tell from these initial comments, from both the scientific and a spiritual perspective, I tend to see social evolution even in the darkest historical moments. I believe that the spiritual history of humanity is full of examples of how it becomes darkest just before the dawn of a new level of collective understanding. And so, dear colleagues, let us now turn to our keynote speaker, an expert historian and founder of History Without Borders, Professor Erkki Tuomija.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to address this session on Does History Have a Direction?
Is former Minister of Affairs in Finland, and I am sure you'll agree. Just
Sorry, can you
I was
hear me?
just going to finish your introduction.
Okay.
We have a little interruption in the connection. So I just wanted to add that Mr. Tuomija is not just the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland, but as I'm sure you will agree with me, it takes an enlightened society to appoint a historian as minister. That is no small token of Finland. So, Mr. Tuomija, what can you tell us about the historical patterns you discern, and what do you believe they point to?
Thank you very much. One of the most well-known attempts to give history a direction was the book The End of History by Francis Fukuyama in 1989, where he argued that history should be viewed as an evolutionary process and that the end of history in this sense means that liberal democracy is the final form of government for all nations. This is, of course, a simplified summary of Fukuyama's message, and he was wise enough to complete the title of his book with a question mark, which subsequent events have amply justified. In my view, history can never be written in such a way that it will not always leave it open to re-evaluation and interpretations of history and long cycles should also be approached with caution. And we can recall Zhou Enlai's answer to President Nixon when he asked his Chinese host in 1972 what the significance of the French Revolution was. It was too early to say, was the answer, although it has since been surmised that the questioner and the respondent may have had in mind the 1968 student revolution in Paris. Nevertheless, I will attempt to identify some of the long-term cycles that influenced our views of history. And population growth needs to be mentioned first. Humans as a species are less than 500,000 years old, But 6,000 years ago, there were not even 10 million people in the world. And at the beginning of our era, there were no more than 170 million of us in the whole world. The 1 billion mark was not crossed until the early 19th century and the 2 billion mark in the 1920s. And at the end of World War II, the number was 2.3 billion, after which it has more than quadrupled in the past 8 years to the current 8.2 billion. And this population growth is the main reason why we live in a world of increasing interdependence in a way which will come to dominate the way we understand and interpret history. And one obvious conclusion is that we can have no historical knowledge or experience on the one hand of how the relationships between people and the communities, nations and states they form will be organized in a world of increasing interdependence inhabited by such a large population, nor, on the other, how this number of people will affect how we organize our relationship with the natural environment. Since the Industrial Revolution, humankind has developed increasingly efficient ways of extracting natural resources from our environment, transforming them into products for our use, and in doing so, leaving an ever increasing amount of waste, emissions, and toxins in the environment. And we have only recently become aware of the unsustainability of this development. Now, in the best case scenario, we may have at most a few decades to adapt all human activities on Earth to the requirement of ecologically, socially, and economically sustainable development. Can we do this? Our answer would only a few decades ago have been more certain about a positive answer than today. Optimistic belief in the future has now mostly eroded. We are living in times where we no longer share the belief that tomorrow will inevitably be better than yesterday. And if one, as a historian, tries to see what is going on in a sufficiently long arc, one can say that this is the story about the rise and decline of the belief in progress. This belief in progress, the idea that the course of history is inexorably moving towards better times, began to replace the static or cyclical concept of time and became dominant at the beginning of the so-called modern era. It is especially associated with the breakthrough of the Enlightenment philosophy of the 18th century. And the belief in progress was not a uniform idea, and it it believed in a better future could be shared by both Adam Smith and Karl Marx, as well as later liberals, capitalists, and communists. They differed, of course, on what this better future entailed and how it could be brought about, but they shared a belief in progress as such. And the decline in belief in progress is not directly related to how the world has developed, and it is not explained by the perception that the world has become worse or more dangerous. Indeed, there are significant items where we see undeniable progress worldwide, such as, for example, falling infant mortality, lengthening life expectancy, and how the probability of famine has receded. But at the same time, our uncertainty about what the future entails has grown. This belief in progress is therefore also multidimensional. There have always been doomsday prophets preaching about the coming end of the world, but in our time, the global consequences of population growth, climate change, and weapons of mass destruction have made it possible to present quite plausible scientific scenarios for how life on Earth can end than those which in history have been based solely on divine revelation. And there is also the cultural pessimism expressed by Otto Spengler 100 years ago in his Decline of the West. And this is also linked to the postmodernist view of the great end of great narrative. It is actually located somewhere in between belief in progress and predictions of doomsday, as there is no narrative greater than the end of the world. We should not overlook path dependency as a constraint on human choices. And with this, I refer to the idea that the system's current state and future outcomes are heavily influenced by its past decisions and events, making it difficult to change course even if a different path might be more beneficial. Essentially, past choices create a path that limits future possibilities. But even a close analysis of path dependency, as useful and important as it is, cannot give us any certain knowledge about whether the world is going for the better or for the worse, or whether even it's going to destroy itself. Living in such a world of uncertainty is not easy. However, it does not have to and must not mean surrendering to hopelessness and despair. And could history be an antidote to this hopelessness and despair? One consequence of the lack of history in our time, that is, the weakening awareness and understanding of how we have come to where we are today, is that this lack of awareness also makes it more difficult to see and take control of the future. It also feeds the short-sightedness of both modernity, here and now thinking, and increases the chances of becoming prisoners of history and historical myths and tools for the aspirations of politicians who abuse it. History has made us into what we are, but we should not be satisfied with remaining passive victims of history, but take on the role of active makers of history. Uh, and just to sum up, I would say that yes, I think that there is a growing awareness. Perhaps the majority of the people are aware that they cannot continue with business as usual. But can we overcome the path dependency, which makes it very difficult to make a clean break with this path? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a powerful entry into this topic. And of course, you've helped us really appreciate the soft power of historical understanding. How we understand history really influences how we see the path forward. So you leave us with a very powerful reminder that the weakening of historical understanding in our current here and now consumer society has led to short-term thinking and decision-making, through which we become, as you say, prisoners of history. But now that we've heard your very thoughtful remarks on the long cycles that influence our view of history, such as population growth and the complexity of global organization it requires, and the only very recent scientific learning about sustainability, as well as the vacillations of beliefs about progress, which we will come back to again later in this discussion, I would like to invite each of our panelists to take 5 minutes to comment on this pivotal question, which is, do we see history as guided by forces which follow a discernible direction or as unfolding chaotically? I would like to offer a way for us to keep time of this important conversation so that we can have a second round. If you are okay with this, when after 4 minutes, I will give you a signal that you've got 1 minute remaining so that you can wrap up your initial comments, and then hopefully we can really have a second round of more in-depth discussion. So the question once again is, do we see history as guided by forces which follow a discernible direction or as unfolding chaotically? We turn now to the president of the World Academy, Gary Jacobs. And so Gary, from the perspective of your lifetime of service to social development and global governance, what do you consider important for people to understand about the evolutionary trajectory of history, especially at a time when civilization appears to be eroding.
Elena, thank you very much. First, for agreeing to moderate this session. And Erki, I'd like to thank you for coming and welcome you to the Academy. I was very glad that we could get you as a keynote speaker at the beginning of the session. Elena, my actual plan was to be the last speaker in this. I asked this question, I formulated the idea of this session because I really wanted to hear from other people and how they're thinking about this, because I think the answer to this question will determine our view of the future and what's going on now. And therefore, I'm almost hesitant to tell you my views up front, but since you asked me to, I will, with brevity. I think that is a very important question for us now. And just as for full disclosure, my own thoughts on the subject has been strongly influenced by my study of Sri Aurobindo, who definitely has an evolutionary perspective on the evolution of humanity and the evolution of society. But I'd like to look at it in the context that we're grappling with it in the Academy today. Most of the history we look at focuses on, as Erki said, he spoke about the quantitative increase in population from 10 million about 10,000, 10 millennium ago, and we see the quantitative increase, which we know now from demographers will change after a while and will probably start going in the other direction on population, but that's been very noticeable. We also see unquestionably a movement from local and isolated communities and individuals to what is now more and more, if not fully, a global community for the first time in history, as far as we can track back to it. As a direction. And we not only see it in terms of the movement of people and the interaction of people, but the growth of institutions from local, isolated, and the growth of cultures to more and more interacting, more and more growing through the complexity of that interaction, more and more an exchange of ideas, exchange of beliefs, and exchange of values. And I guess the real significance of the question for me with reference to global turbulence is, are we, as Catan suggested in, I think, his opening remarks, are we really at a point of transition in global civilization? And if that's true, it's a very important question for us to understand what that might mean and what are the significance of it. And incidentally, Francis Fukuyama is a fellow of the Academy. He was elected about 30 years ago. And I think we don't want to make the mistake of assuming that we have found a formula that's suddenly going to realize itself. It was a humbling experience for the Western world, not just for a historian, to realize that our view of the world was quite narrow at that time, and to assume that it was going to go in a particular linear fashion. And I think we should not make that mistake today. Another thing we shouldn't mistake is we see in history a continuous pattern of rapid advances followed by at least partial retreats. So that it's hard when you follow history up close, it's hard to know whether we're going forward or back, or whether that was really a progress, or it was an accident that's going to be reversed and never followed up again. So it's not history, the record of history is not very easy to decipher, even in retrospect, to draw clear conclusions that we could apply to today. But there are some things. Already we're at one. Okay, well, at least I won't get the chance. I won't bother to disclose what I really wanted to say. I'd just like to point out a few things. I think we are at an extraordinary period in history where the past is not a clear determinant of the future, where we're moving into a new phase, and that's to be identified. And I just want to mention a few parts of it very briefly. I think the emergence of the importance of the individual is a phenomenon mostly of the 20th century, even more so of the 21st century, with the empowerment of the internet and all that has come. And the significance which Ishmael Sarageldin pointed out in his opening remarks, that the UN Declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 was an unprecedented point in history, marking the importance of the individual, not just of the collective, not just of the society. And the SDGs in Agenda 2030 was an affirmation, confirmation of that in an effort to take it and realize it as an actual fact, which we know we haven't done. But I think we have to be careful not to write off the SDGs or write off the Declaration of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because we see history has these forward and retroactive movements. Clearly, we're not there yet. And just one other point I'll make. If we look at the evolution of society over thousands of years, or the nation state over 100 years, the nation state represented a critical change in the psychology of human beings, that we were no longer identifying our identity because of our ethnic background immediately or necessarily, because of our religion, because of our race. But more and more we were into a phase of heterogeneous age, where our identity was more and more a mix of this thing we called nationality, this obscure concept of nationality. And now we're going beyond the nation state to global society. And the values, the universal values that are now we're attempting to implement, are values that overcome all of the distinctions and differences and affirm a unity and commonality of all human nature, which, as far as we know, has never taken place in history. And I think I'm emphasizing the subjective dimension of what's going on may be a greater determinant of the future than the objective facts and the technology and the institutions that we see around us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. I know this is a very significant topic, and it's really hard to be brief on this because it is so close to home. It has everything to do, as I said earlier, with how we show up in the world, how we view this historical moment. And I just wanted to follow up very briefly on one thing you said. You disclosed that your personal approach to the study of history has been influenced by the study of the spiritual teachings of Sri Aurobindo. And I will say that my approach has also been influenced by the spiritual study of Baha'i spiritual sources. But really, in addition to that, we now have physicists and physical science that has very clearly established the reality of consciousness and the non-locality of consciousness, and that is Nobel science. And what these physicists are saying is that the essence of consciousness is to evolve. Now, we are talking about a very long view perspective, and you're very right that the record of history in the short term is much harder to read. But I think you pointed to some very important factors here. And now we are very grateful to have on this panel two representatives of the Force for Good organization. And as I understand it, Chris and Ketan have discussed with each other who will share what aspects of the thinking of the organization. So we turn first to Chris Hansmeyer, Head of Research at Force for Good, who will highlight for us some more general points on how the organization envisions and works with transforming the current capitalist system towards a secure and sustainable future. Chris, the floor is yours. And
Great. Thank you.
4 minutes, I'll signal you again.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the World Academy for hosting the conference and this important event. And thank you, Elena, for moderating. You asked a really interesting question up front or to frame this, which is, what are the forces that we discern? And I think any forces that we discern through the patterns that we see. And the challenge with that is that depending on where and when in history you stand, you see very different patterns. So both Gary and Dr. Tuomioja have referenced Francis Fukuyama, who I think was only half joking when he called his paper The End of History, because from his perspective, liberal democracy had come off of an extraordinary 200-year bull run and had just effectively defeated communism to become the dominant way in which societies would organize themselves. Now, if Mr. Fukuyama had been writing in the spring of 1945, I don't think he would have called his paper that, and he wouldn't have written that paper. He probably would have written a paper that he called Cycles of Violence, and he would have looked to explain why it just seems to be that every generation or two, nation states fight each other in increasingly savage wars over the same reasons. So even in that one example, you can see that there are cyclical narratives of history, and there are progressive narratives of history. And I think the force is we're looking at what are the forces that give rise to the appearance of these shapes, right? So I think it's important to state that history obviously doesn't have a goal. It's not goal directed, like evolution isn't either. So it's not determined, but it's not random either, right? History and events play out against a structural and contextual background that is very consistent over time. So structural factors like geography, climate, limitations of human biology, the laws of physics are effectively a constant background against which events unfold. And structural factors like religion or institutions or culture are obviously amenable to change over time, but they're also remarkably persistent, right? So in sciences, if you have an experiment and you rerun it under the same conditions, you should always get the same result. And history obeys those same laws, right? So it turns out that invading Russia from the west with a land army in late summer is a bad idea. And that's been independently verified by Sweden in the 18th century, by France in the 19th, and by the Germans in the 20th century. So you have the emergence of what appear to be cyclical structures in history. But history obviously doesn't repeat itself because there is a force or something that is like a force that drives it forward. And Elena, you called it understanding. I would call it knowledge, right? Knowledge is the one thing in human history that has continuously increased, not in all places, not at the same time, and not always in one direction, but over time. It has been accumulative, it's been accretive, and it's been exponential. And all of the progress that we see in the world, whether it was the population growth that Professor Diomija referred to, or the organizational complexity, or the universalization of values, all of those ultimately come back to the fact that we as human beings and as societies have been building knowledge over time. And it's that knowledge that enables us to break through these cycles that we see. So if you would have asked somebody 100 years ago about epidemics, they would say, sure, we have them every couple of every couple of generations, and they go and wipe out a significant portion of our population. Those don't exist anymore. So I think there's a lot of patterns and examples from history that we can look at as case studies that can explain where we are in the current day. And we need to learn the lessons from those. But as Professor Tuomija said, we're not prisoners of history because we can use knowledge to both learn the mistakes from history and to come up with new paradigms that break through the structures that have limited us in the past. And I think I'm out of time now, so I'll stop there and hand the floor over to Katan.
That was wonderful. Thank you so very much. It's amazing how much you were able to say in your 5 minutes. And I would just jump in and reinforce one of the several very important things that you offered us. Cyclical structures appear, but they drive forward. And that is the case in development, in individual and in collective development. There's cycles, cyclical cycles, but they have actually an evolutionary directive. And in this process of moving between cycles, there's always a lot of uncertainty. And we see in development that in this progression, in this developmental progression, some people retreat under the uncertainty and some people push forward. But at the end of the day, there is a direction to this process. So thank you so much. And now we turn to Ketan that will take us into an even more focused look on this question. Please, Ketan. Oh,
You're
you're
on.
mute.
Thank you very much, Elena. And really, I want to also thank Gary very much for all the fascinating conversations he and I have had. There was one in particular in Mumbai that led us to think about cycles and history and where we are today. I'll begin just by saying I found myself yesterday night after a long day browsing through YouTube to see what was going on in the world. And what you find is a fascinating set of conflicts between individuals in formats where they argue about whose fault it is that there is a conflict. And there is such violence and hatred in these conversations. It made me think our neurology in some ways is designed, usefully designed for survival purposes, but designed to give us a delusional experience that we are a unit that is independent, independent of the world around us, an independent agent that is empowered to make decisions as if it was a unit of one. And that delusional sense, I think, leads us to assert our egos in ways that are deeply unhelpful, and to believe that we are somehow at the end of history in some way as an agent that will act and make a big difference. I want to step right back and say, it also made me think immediately that the cosmic cycle is the universe began 13.8 billion years ago, and there are so many theories about where it goes next, but there are maybe four big pertinent cycles that I want to draw on for where we are today. One is the climate cycle. There are many theories around it, Gaia and Milankovitch and tipping cycles and points. But it essentially says the Earth was stable for 3.5 billion years. Ice ages come every 100,000 years. We're in the Anthropocene now, where we're breaching planetary boundaries. All of a sudden, that becomes completely relevant to where we are today. These cycles are meeting and converging on us in a risk of perhaps an irreversible shift in how we behave on the planet. And there are human development cycles, macro ones, big cycles, where we were foragers for a long period, maybe 190,000 years apparently. We were agrarian for maybe 11 to 12,000 years. We were in the industrial age for 200 years. So you see the rate and speed of change. We've been in the information age for about arguably somewhere between 25 and 50 years. Some would argue slightly longer. And it's uncertain where that phase goes next. Because we have the information age has yielded weaponry of a nature that could wipe out the planet, it's possible that there is a collapse now of our civilization and presence on the planet, or that we break through to sustainability. The third I want to point out is the imperial cycle, or the great power cycle. And there have been some great thinkers on this. Kaludin, Toynbee, Turchin, Mottl as an analyst, but there's so many great thinkers. And essentially, if you do the maths, which Chris and I recently did in a paper that is about to be published, empires last about 200, 300 years. And there is a cycle to them, a process. That they begin, they peak, and they overreach, and then they collapse. Which leads us to a very pertinent question for today. When will the US hegemonic decline see its ultimate position where it loses significance, where the US loses significance? And then finally, there's cycles of violence where we are in positions of trauma because of things that are done to us, or we do to each other, or we do to ourselves. And you see this in so many different circumstances, in wars in particular, in torture and ways of conflict and so on. But there is a cycle to that. There's harm, there's trauma, there's retaliation, and it becomes intergenerational. And we get programmed to, in this process, to not break through. And the breakthrough is ultimately required to make a difference to stopping the cycle of violence. And so these are some of the cycles I see as very important for us deciding where we are. And if I draw it all together, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more, and I'm at the end of my 5 minutes, we're in that very special moment where we're about to, in the next 25 years, reach 10 billion people. We're in a hegemonic cycle where American power will no longer be the guiding force of our times. We're in a climate cycle which is existential for us. And even if it doesn't wipe out all of us, it will completely change the structure of how we run ourselves on this planet. And we're in a series of eras, shifts from the industrial era, which built everything we recognize today, to an information and technological shift, which is very profound and will wipe out the basis of our power structures and economics and social interactions to create something very different. And so this is a very important historic time where many cycles are converging. I look forward to discussing what we do about that too in this panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was quite profound. You're leaving us with a lot to try to address in our limited remaining time. Not sure how we're going to do it, but how these cycles are converging now. That's a big question. We turn to our last but not least speaker on the panel, Pavel Luksha, who's founder of Global Education Futures Initiatives. And maybe it's appropriate that we turn to an educator to ask how he sees the convergence of these cycles at this time. So, Pavel, from your focus on learning ecosystems and skills for the future, what do you consider important for people to understand about the evolutionary trajectory of history, especially at a time when civilization appears to be eroding? And you're welcome to connect your comments to what Ketan just offered us as a perspective of the converging cycles. Pavel.
Thank you very much, Elena, and thank you, World Academy, for organizing this important panel, which I think is a crucial conversation for us. I will not speak as an educator, but more like a system scientist and evolutionary scholar. And from this perspective, my thinking has been for a long time around bigger cycles of human history, basically taking human history in the perspective that Ketan mentioned, which is the perspective of cosmic evolution and the planetary evolution and evolution of all life. From that perspective, humanity has a history. Let's say if we think of Homo as a species of approximately 2 million years, and as Homo sapiens, which is the wise human, which I doubt we really are so wise, but that's what the name of our species is supposed to mean. That history lasts for approximately the estimated period between 100 and 200,000 years. It is important to say that we increasingly realize that this period of history, most of human history, has not been just, let's say, a peaceful coexistence with the planetary systems. In fact, throughout that period, the most period of our human history, we have been expanding as a species, literally proliferating every possible land ecosystem on our planet. So we are the super invasive species, and that maybe points to one of our crucial roles that we could play in some particular direction of the history. Now, approximately 10,000 years ago, the new phase began, which was some societies started to stabilize in certain locations for multiple reasons, including climate change, and perhaps also religious reasons, spiritual reasons. And that led to what we now know as the current form of our existence. And over this time, we started also to evolve our technologies, our material culture. Now, where it took us, on one hand, it took us to create an enormous, what some people call nature 2. I have 1 minute. Okay. So just wrapping up quickly, the nature 2 is now increasingly, the artificial nature, is now increasingly becoming autonomous, increasingly becoming independent. From this perspective, we are entering the nexus of crisis. We become a planetary species in the interaction of all living ecosystems. The history of humans can no longer be seen independent, and probably can never be seen independent, but now it certainly cannot be seen independent from the history of biosphere, and more and also from the history of technosphere. So we are entering, we are in the midst of one of the most massive crises of our species, the evolutionary crisis, which I think poses ahead of us the question: do we collapse, do we disappear, or do we transcend? And transcending would means finding harmony with both nature one, the biosphere, and nature two, the increasingly autonomous technosphere. And that will be the transcendence of our species, which will also require new levels of understanding, knowledge building, and consciousness.
Thank you so much, Pavel. And also thank you to our participants. I don't know if you've had a chance to check, but we have some active contributions on the chat. I'll take the liberty to read one or two. There were a lot of congratulatory remarks for the cogency of what was offered. Special thanks to Ketan, who a participant said has beautifully consolidated all the key points we've been discussing throughout the conference into just 4 or 5 crisp insights. And there is an important recommendation from Bridges, from Dr. Stephen Hartman, who suggests that we should be careful not to impute ultimate meanings to history as a force based on notions of progress that are themselves historically contingent. Forgive me, there was some movement here. This is not at all to say that we can learn from history, from complete experiments of the past, that, whether intended or unintended, nor does this mean we cannot apply this knowledge, our developing understanding. Yes, I also prefer developing understanding because knowledge does evolve, to the challenges of the present and future. Clearly we can, but not in a deterministic way, nor with the positivistic assurance of the scientific process, principles of empiricism, falsifiability, etc. So that is a very interesting comment to propel us into your final round of very specific thoughts that you'd like to offer. We have 6 minutes to go, dear colleagues. Let's make the best of them. So let's take 1.5 minutes each, if you're comfortable with that, for a closing comment that you'd like to leave us with. Professor Tuomija?
Thank you. Just a point on the knowledge. In addition to knowledge, we have a surplus of information. And whereas we acknowledge that knowledge tends to be true, of course, it can be scientific method that can change our views of what is the objective truth. But information can be false or true. And that is the challenge that we are facing in today's world, is the surplus of and overflow of information, which is being used also on purpose to spread falsehood. And we are living in a time when even the President of the United States can say that, well, facts don't matter, opinions are the only thing that matter. And this is becoming the dominant feature of our discourse today. And therefore, I would stress the need to try to stick to facts as far as possible and to real knowledge, because only real knowledge can lead to understanding. We have to follow the information. We have to also be aware of the kind of disinformation that is being spread around. But we have to be able to also work against it, combat it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate this reminder. I grew up in the Marxist experiment, where also there was all kinds of things that were claimed as facts. And so I am very cognizant of the importance of real facts that we can check scientifically and what we're basing our claims on. So very, very grateful for this Professor Tuomija. Gary, this time I'm going to let you have the closing word. So I'll go to Chris now, Ketan, and then Pavel and yourself. Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just highlight that or reiterate the comment that you read out, right? That progress is an emergent phenomenon, right? It's not a driving force in and of itself. And history is obviously not deterministic as well, right? So we cannot predict the future that arises from the past. Or you can do, well, you can with predictive data analytics. If you have huge amounts of data, you can make very specific probabilistic statements. But as Professor Tuomija was saying, we have a surplus of information to do that. So the other thing I would say is that progress plays out on time frames that I don't think we can necessarily rely on the future to be better than tomorrow, right? I mean, again, coming back to the progress of liberal democracy, if you were living in 1815 around the Congress of Vienna, right, that all of your adult life would have been spent under a repressive, regressive regime, and it was only in 1848 that you would have seen progress again. So from your perspective, there was no arc. So we need to actively shape the future and cannot wait on emergent phenomenon to make the world a better place.
Thank you. That was really poignant, to the point. Thank you so very much. Ketan.
Thank you. What an interesting discussion that could go on so long. So my brief reflection on what it might take, given the convergence and the forces that are moving us forward or backwards, but moving us today, I would say this, that we are at an unusual point where we have so many tools, so many resources, and so much knowledge that is building solutions. But we are just as inclined, because of our psychology, our genetics, and our environment, to use that to have more conflict, do more conquest. And so the answer must be surely that I find myself thinking surely that it's a journey inside that allows you to have a deeper understanding of who you are, your place in the world, some understanding of the link and the awareness of your position relative to others, and some experience of compassion that encourages you to interpret the world through that lens, while still understanding that there are others that will be aggressive and likely to want to subjugate you. So it's this tension of compassion for others to create a more meaningful, better world where others can live well, at the same time as protecting yourself from those that would stop you and others doing that. And somehow in that process, we will find a better answer if we're on the journey towards that place of collective consciousness.
So beautiful, so beautiful. Thank you so very much. I guess I'd just like to add that because history is not deterministic, and because of what you just pointed out, each developmental leap takes us to a qualitatively new place, a place of greater compassion, of greater understanding. And it is not predictable. It's qualitatively different than the previous one. So I think we're making some real progress in understanding the dynamics here. Let's have Pavel add his closing words, and then Gary.
Thank you, Elena. And I'd like to answer your question, actually, which is what educators need to do at this point in time. And I think educators have a crucial responsibility. First of all, to bring an understanding that we are planetary species with planetary responsibility, and that we need to cultivate planetary consciousness. So that's one crucial element. And one crucial element of planetary consciousness is learning to live in peace with each other, because global wars are probably the biggest existential threats to us immediately right now. So cultivating peace and cultivating compassion is the basis of our future pathway to transcendence that we're discussing.
Thank you. Thank you. And maybe as an educator, I will add that as we are teaching people that we are a planetary species, we can always offer a lot of historical examples of how many limiting perceptions and frames of reference have been expanded and transcend it over time. So that helps keep us on track and keep the horizon more visible. And with that, we come to Gary, who has the horizon to envision this whole event and many other such. And surely, Gary, you have some wisdom with which you can close.
Well, thanks very much for a very stimulating discussion. We've compressed a lot into a short time. Quick responses. Catan mentioned the convergence of forces and the increasing pressure for change. And I think that's a very important factor. It's not a prediction, but we see that the really dramatic changes that human beings have been capable of have only been under periods when the pressure was so great that we couldn't continue in the way we were. The UN, the founding of the UN came as a result of two horrendous world wars, which we said we've got to do something to prevent this from happening again, as one of many examples of it. I think it's also clear, as Catan said, that we have so many tools for change today that we have the possibility of doing something different. The whole question is not that. The whole question is whether we'll do it or not. The whole question is not the objective situation that we see. The whole question is subjectively, are we capable of being different than we have been up until now? And is there any evidence that we have been different in the past from what we were in a previous period? I think that's what I was trying to very shortly emphasize, the subjective dimension of this, a question of choice. And when one of you mentioned that, I was reminded, and the first time this topic came on the agenda of the Academy, to my knowledge, was in 1999, when we organized in Vancouver a half-day session on social development. And we weren't talking about determinisms. So we finally came up with, and we published a publication at that time called Human Choice. And I think that's where we come back to now. We can't predict from past events or even the threats that we face what's going to happen. This is not a determinism. The determinant is going to be us. And the real power is with us. And as Catan said, if we have that capacity for compassion, if we have that common sense for our survival, and not just to try to dominate more and more over the other, if we have that capacity to outgrow the egoism of individuality and really find the unity behind our individuality that makes us capable of not being like the people who came before or the way we were before, that we have that choice. I think that's the message for us, that for the Academy, we have a choice. We're not predicting what's going to happen. We're not saying there's a determinism. We are the determinant. It's up to us. And so what do we do about it?
Well, thank you. Thank you. That is a powerful, powerful closing offering. And of course, in our next session, we will be talking exactly about choice, moral choice and motivation. So we continue with a short break. Thank you to all participants. Thank you most of all to this illustrious panel. And we continue for the last panels before the closing of this magnificent conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Thanks for all of you joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Walt,
Hi, can you see me?
I see
Oh,
you
you can. Good. Good morning.
quite clearly. Well, good.
Bleary-eyed morning from Colorado here.
Yes, thanks for adjusting to the time.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Elena, hi. I enjoyed your session. You're a great moderator.
Oh, you were in our previous. This was a remarkable session, wasn't it? The
It
historical
was, yeah,
analysis
definitely.
left us all needing to take a pause and reflect. There was a lot to think about, but it's a wonderful continuation to your session now.
Yeah, I feel like we're a nice capstone for the whole conference, actually.
Hello, Walt. Hello, Gary, Jonathan, Elena. Hello, everybody.
Neve, good morning.
Hello,
Colorado.
good morning.
Let's see how we're doing on time here. We've got about 2 minutes.
And thank you, Walt, for your note. I just saw that, the note you sent by email. Thank you. That's quite something to look at.
Oh, good. I'm glad it was helpful. I have to say, Elena, I really was selfish in putting this together because I really wanted to hear what you had to say about these things. I ran across you some time ago and I looked you up and I thought, well, and this is a topic that really is of great interest to me. So I asked Gary if I could moderate this because I wanted to benefit from the wisdom that I'm surrounding myself with today.
Well,
So
that's
thank you so
very,
much
very
for
kind.
agreeing to be a panelist. And Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning.
And thanks for your note. I just I didn't see it until just a few moments ago, Jonathan. Did you want me to distribute that to the panelists?
Yeah, it was given. It was a essay, closing essay in a book that the government of India put together at the Millennium Summit. That was a limited edition, and it only went to heads of state, foreign ministers, and the permanent representatives at the UN.
Right,
So
you
it's
mentioned that. I saw you mention that in a previous panel. So I'll distribute that to everybody.
it's pertinent to the discussion.
Great. Mila is
Really
not.
wonderful that you decided to host this panel right at the end of this conference.
Isn't it
Yeah,
serendipitous,
so
isn't it?
pertinent. I mean, you heard we ended with this question, the previous panel, and
Yeah, I did.
the
I
previous
did.
panel was a summary of everything that went for the previous three
That's
and a half
right.
years. So yeah, very.
Yes, and there were some other sessions also that fed into this as well. There was one on values that I thought was very relevant. Jonathan was in that one. It feeds into this one very nicely. Okay, we're going to go ahead and proceed. So, welcome everyone, and greetings from Colorado. We're living through a period of profound global disruption, political polarization, institutional breakdown, social fragmentation, and existential threats ranging from climate change to AI governance. These are not just technical or political problems, they're a moral crisis rooted in the loss of shared meaning, vision, purpose, and trust. I think that one of the underlying premises of this session is that moral fragmentation undermines collective action. Alasdair MacIntyre warned modern society lacks coherent moral language. We argue over justice, rights, and freedom without shared premises, leading to deadlock and distrust. This is evidence in global paralysis on issues like climate change, pandemic response, or economic justice. We don't just disagree on solutions, we disagree on what is good, fair, and right. Sri Aurobindo foresaw that external rules-based morality cannot guide humanity through periods of upheaval. We need ethics rooted in consciousness, inner growth, and spiritual integrity. Technological progress and political institutions alone cannot substitute for ethical depth, as seen in the ethical void behind AI development, which is of great interest to me personally, economic extraction, and bureaucratic violence. Both thinkers argue that true integrity comes from not compliance, but from alignment between belief, action, and deeper purpose. Without integrity, institutions fail, corruption grows, cynicism spreads, and public trust collapses. With integrity, even small actions can restore legitimacy and inspire collective renewal. McIntyre points us back to narrative and tradition, the stories and communities that once gave ethical life to structure and coherence. One of our previous sessions just focused on that, the importance of narrative and tradition. Sri Aurobindo points us forward to a spiritual evolution in which ethics emerges naturally from inner truth rather than external pressure. Together, they help us imagine a society that is grounded but dynamic, principled but evolving, and capable of moral clarity without moral rigidity. In summary, I would say we're living today in a moral relativist, emotivist environment. And because of that, we cannot fix global systems with broken moral foundations. We must restore a shared sense of purpose rooted in tradition, elevated by consciousness, and lived with integrity. So this panel is not just theoretical, it's a diagnosis of the moral crisis behind today's global turbulence and a proposal for the ethical transformation that we urgently need. Our panelists bring a rich blend of legal insight, developmental psychology, leadership innovation, and science diplomacy, perfectly aligned to explore how ethics, integrity, and morality can ground global solutions to turbulence. Jonathan Gradoff is a lawyer and president of the Global Security Institute. His life work unites legal, spiritual, and diplomatic approaches to global ethics and nuclear disarmament. Elena Mustakova is the founder and president of Integral Light Institute for Consciousness, Society, and Well-Being, a WAAS fellow and moral psychologist specializing in the development of consciousness and spiritually grounded ethical systems. Mila Popovich is the founder of Evolving Leadership. She's the Director General for the Director of Interculturalism of Montenegro and a trustee of WAAS. And I would say a transformational systems thinker working at the intersection of ethics, sustainability, and gender. And Monif Zubi is the Vice President of Arab Scientific Community Organization, trustee of WAAS, and his leadership bridges science, diplomacy, and human development. I would like to start with Elena, because I've been eagerly wanting to open the floor to her comments about this, because I think professionally, you're perhaps the person most focused on this. So, Elena, I'll turn it over to you. Elena, you need to unmute yourself.
Just realized that I'm muted. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Walton, for putting together this panel at the very end of what's been a remarkable conference for the 65th anniversary of the World Academy. The question that you're posing, you framed it this way for me. you said that my work is at the intersection of psychology, spirituality, and moral development. And your question to me was, what happens to human beings and societies when morality is reduced to social convention or emotional reaction? And I was very appreciative of the way that you framed this question, excellent question, which has actually occupied me my whole life. But professionally, since 1990, when I left a totalitarian regime after a master's degree in language and literature, in order to pursue this very question in depth in my doctoral work in the US. Essentially, I wanted to understand why some people really betray their inner sense of what is right and true and beautiful, and other people remain true to it despite sometimes very high cost. So this led to research into the lifespan ontogenesis of critical moral consciousness, which was eventually awarded. And it showed clearly that people thrive when moral motivation is central to their personhood, and that their characters and lives shrink when they are guided by primarily expedient concerns. And that was a surprise to me, regardless of their intellectual capacity. So in fact, moral motivation, my research surprised me, was the driving force, not intellectual development, which was my assumption. Coming from an intellectual environment in Eastern Europe, there were some assumptions, but I was very surprised, pleasantly. Essentially, moral motivation is central to health, wholeness, and personality integration. So that was the result of my research, and I'll be very short in just saying that what I discovered, which is, as I said, very different than what I expected, was that moral motivation was really central to personality development, and it manifested in 4 dimensions: the dimension of identity, the dimension of authority and moral authority and responsibility, the dimension of relationships and relatedness, more specifically, and the dimension of meaning and purpose. And I can come back to that a lot more later if we have time. But as I took this research into the next 35 years of clinical experience, I saw again and again in my clinical practice with individuals and families, and actually communities, because I've worked a lot with communities, that the health of the individual is a function of the degree of their personality integration, at the center of which are moral frames of reference and moral purpose. And when those are weak, unexamined, or absent, in an expedient culture, an expedient consumer culture that does not encourage this kind of inquiry, people experience a range of symptoms of individual and relational unhealth. So there's absolutely no coincidence and no surprise in the fact that at the peak of globalizing consumer culture, though worldwide, we also witnessed a phenomenon that in the year 2000, the World Health Organization identified as a global social breakdown syndrome. And now we have the rise of anxiety and depression that have become the ultimate pandemic. So much of my work as a social scientist has been dedicated to calling on my discipline, the discipline of psychology, to recognize its moral purpose and overcome the reticence of mainstream psychology to address moral issues, which is unfathomable but a fact. So this culminated in 2014 in a volume of Springer International Psychology series titled Towards a Socially Responsible Psychology for a Global Era, in which I served as senior editor. And this volume has been described as sweeping in its scope, passionate in its tone, and audacious in its claims and objective, seeking to inspire the transformation of an entire discipline and challenging some of its most fundamental assumptions. And it was called a canary in the coal mine. That was over 10 years ago. And after that, we discovered some pretty disturbing facts about how psychological practice has been used. But it was already apparent at that time that it was going in that direction. So now, 10 years later, when those predictions about the erosion of public and private character and collective ethic have become a sweeping reality of massive broken trust. I would like to come back to your first point on moral fragmentation and the fact that we quite apparently disagree on everything in terms of what is good, fair, and right. However, from an evolutionary developmental perspective, as well as from a Baha'i-informed spiritual perspective, I see this extreme questioning, which my children, grown-up adults, expose me to all the time, as a developmental step towards a new level of moral and spiritual integration. People are questioning all established moral boundaries, in the process debunking and deconstructing and leaving a wreck on their trail. But what they seem to be expressing is what I actually found in my original research, which is an innate spiritual hunger for greater coherence. That was the most important finding in my research, that you actually see that in every child. And when people no longer express that in adulthood, they tell you stories of how it has been overlaid and blocked and subverted. And so this quest right now and all the confusion that it's wreaking, to me, is an expression of this moral and spiritual hunger for greater coherence, one that actually transcends the patriarchal morality that I grew up with and that communism embraced and all the totalitarian systems embraced and enforced. People are looking for moral and spiritual frames of reference that embrace the fullness of human diversity. So from my spiritual perspective, which is consistent actually with evolutionary science, this is our next stage of moral and ethical evolution towards which we're headed amidst the chaos and the turbulence. And so I believe it is important to help people appreciate that, because when we move through confusion with conscious intention, even the most challenging circumstances contribute to personality growth and strengthen our moral fiber, as we all know here on this panel, I'm sure. So rather than lamenting the loss of past spiritual rootedness, I am more inclined to work towards helping people find a new level of spiritual maturity and integration in this unique historical moment. And my spiritual framework helps me because I understand ethics to consist of universal components, universal spiritual components, and social components, which evolve and are relative historically. And so while the universal spiritual core of ethics and morality and our spiritual hunger are hard to debate and actually quite easy to track throughout the history of civilization, despite all of our disturbing behaviors, our social ethics have been evolving, and in the process, also testing the limits, testing the boundaries, experiencing a lot of swings between extremes. And so this whole process of evolution, which is very painstaking, very turbulent, and very disturbing, was actually foreseen and well described spiritually in the mid-19th century. And so it's important for us to keep faith and aim at the horizon. That will be my last thought for now. And so my dedication is both in education, community development, and also in the systems work, which I actually do both in Bulgaria and internationally. My dedication is to holding up that horizon. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That really contributed to my comprehension of the question that's being posed today. So really appreciate that. Jonathan, you've long argued that peace and law are spiritual as well as legal obligations. And after my review of McIntyre and Sriaubendo's views, do you believe that our global ethics infrastructure is morally bankrupt or still salvageable?
Since our moral insights don't come from the information of the world, but come from the luminosity of the soul, like love, patience, goodness, justice. Those come from inside us. They come from our being human. I think that they are ever potential. So there's no dearth of source, ever. Let me give you an example of what I mean. If you took a handful of rose seeds and you burned them, and if you only looked at what you observed as the meaning of the rose seed, you could say the purpose of the rose seed is to give off heat and light and become carbon. That would be an accurate description. And that kind of reductionism would suffice for many scientists, for many people saying, I'm looking for the truth of the purpose of the rose seed. On the other hand, if you took the same rose seeds and put them in earth and fed them with water, they would manifest as beauty and fragrance. And you would come to the conclusion the purpose of the rose seed is beauty and fragrance. Human beings are very much the same as the rose seeds. And if we only look at the observable, if we only look at what we can measure, if we only look at what we can predict, if we only look at what we can control, we will not find out the why of the rose seed or the why of our own lives. We live in a time in which we have made a values, culturally made a values affirmation of the how. So we have in our major intellectual endeavors, you can get a professional degree in law without ever studying justice. You can become a great artist and never create any art that's uplifting or beautiful, just art about art. You can become a great famous philosopher opining on the methodology of philosophy, the how. You can become very wealthy in the market and never produce any goods or services simply by knowing how to manipulate finance. Finance is the how for the markets, not the why, goods and services. You can become a physician without studying healing and only studying techniques. And you can become a religious leader without uplifting with love and transcendence, simply staying within rites, rituals, practices, and dogma. Again, the purpose of art is to open up our eyes to the mysteries of beauty and meaning. The purpose of philosophy is similar. The purpose of finance is goods and services. The purpose of medicine is healing. The purpose of law is justice. And the most absurd preoccupation with how over why are weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, for example. The more you perfect the weapon, the less security you get. And yet, it's folly to just listen to people talk about values. You have to look at their budgets. And the states of the world, our major social organizations' budgets are preoccupied with the how of security, forgetting the why being human beings and the environment. So we're living in a time in which this kind of crass reductionism to the measurable has occluded that part of us that is human. It's as if we've said, I'm following this very fast car, but I'm not sure where it's going, but it's really fast. So I think that we have forgotten the why, and that's really important. And that is an inquiry of mystery, ultimately. It's an inquiry into that which we actually cannot grasp in its entirety, because the universe is infinite and we're part of it. Because we don't know how we got here. What produced this self-aware consciousness? What produced conscience? Why is the golden rule a universal ethical principle we teach our children in every society? and yet we don't apply it to future generations or to others. Let me end with a poem and a point. Weighing ink on paper, the size and structure of each letter, even the paper's fabric itself, will we know the meaning of the words? Measuring the bones, the skin, the blood, the house, the nation, the planet, the solar system, all the galaxies, will we know the meaning of these measurements? Will we find and know soul? Measuring all these gestures, will it be known, this immeasurable love? By observing the outside, the portion understood with the senses, the mind, desire, and the intellect, the essence will not be known. By observing with wisdom, we can know ourselves, and through such understanding, know that which is observing all, a mystery within each of us. When wisdom dawns in the fullness of love and compassion, which is where wisdom dawns, it brings a tranquility that the intellect cannot measure and leads to knowing without symbols and thought. It is such wisdom that governs the investigation of the unchanging, that which is real, that which neither comes nor goes, the mystery that sent us into this world in the first place. So we have developed an epistemology that says we will marginalize that which we cannot control, that to which we will return when we die, that which gives us life itself, the source of meaning. We have denied in our social organization the value of wisdom. And let me state clearly what I mean by wisdom. Wisdom is that gifted level of consciousness that emerges within virtue. As Socrates said, you can't pursue wisdom, but you can pursue virtue. The consequence of virtue is wisdom. The consequence of compassion and love is a level of understanding that cannot be gained by the senses or by willpower. It's a gift. And that's why all wise people are humble and happy, because their happiness is not contingent on circumstance, and their humility gives them the openness for that mystery that gives us life to fill them. The characteristic of those qualities that are the precondition for wisdom is they affirm the ultimate unity of all lives and the harmony of all lives. And the characteristic of those qualities that lead to suffering and ignorance and destruction affirm the illusion of being separate from one another, separate from the natural world, and separate from the mystery that creates us. People who don't know this believe that mystery is shrouded in chaos and darkness, and they avoid it because of that, because their inner lives are chaotic and dark. But people whose hearts are open, who have compassion, discover that the ultimate mystery is not shrouded in darkness, it's shrouded in love and light. And that it is an essential part of our own being. We are mysterious within ourselves. Look at your hand, there's something that touches in the hand, you can't touch it. There's something that sees in our eyes, but you can't see that which is seeing. And there's something that knows within us that gives meaning to these words and meanings to our lives. That which gives meaning, it doesn't have a shape or a form. It cannot be measured. So when a society forgets to have a sense of humility and the pursuit of virtue and wisdom, it becomes very dangerous. And that's precisely where we are. As Socrates said, political sophistry is convincing people that they know about a subject regarding which they know nothing, and then promising to solve a problem that didn't exist.
It's interesting you would bring up Socrates, because McIntyre, one of the things that he concluded was that we needed to revisit Stoicism and
well, it wouldn't be
philosophies.
We need to honor the wise of all traditions. We're largely a Western audience, but you could find the exact same principles in the Upanishads of India, in the teachings of the mystics in the Middle East. But more importantly, you can find it in the political philosophies of systems that embody checks and balances on the pursuit of raw power through law. And institutions that are based on these values are beneficial. And
Well, I
right
appreciate
now,
you bring
those institutions are being marginalized, the institutions that embody those values. So the question of why, what makes us human, is the core question of our time.
I appreciated you bringing up the emphasizing the universality of the golden rule in a previous session. I wasn't aware of that, and really was thought-provoking. Wonder if we teach that enough today. Thank you. I really appreciate your comments. Mila, I'm going to move to you. You've explored ethics through the lens of systems change and cultural transformation. Can the kind of moral renewal that McIntyre and Shurebindo call for occur in today's technocratic institutions, or must it come from the outside? As Gary was talking about earlier, it's up to people to take these decisions, and sometimes we can only do them under pressure. Does it take pressure, or can it come through an evolution of the organizations we already have in place?
I would say it comes from every direction. As I was reminding myself and everybody else through a couple of panels, all technology, all governance, all organization, all education is human. So at any level of social power or personal power, it's the human that carries the power in a certain way or another way, beneficial, self-destructive, universal, inclusive. It depends. Guess what it depends on? On the values that inform that power. And the power itself becomes a tool, a device, a technology, if you will, that we inform, if we want to use the metaphor or literally the notion of algorithm, that we code a certain way. And then ultimately the expression of our power, personal and social, goes into arts, organization, governance, systems of education, healthcare, finance, and everything else. From what we know now, civilizationally, globally, all of our systems are based on biosocial conflict, which is an incredibly irrational, I'm intentionally using that word, it's very important, an incredibly irrational setup where you have one gender exploiting the biosocial conflict is run by system of dominance and exploitation. When you have the natural and the social at odds, in conflict, and in an overpowering relationship where the social overpowers the natural, where the globe and the global systems capture the natural world and see it only as resource, where one gender uses another, one region another, one species another. I mean, in a perpetual setup of overpowering exploitation and abuse. Some of it is direct violence, some of that is what we call slow violence, long wave building violence that is not immediately physically apparent. But that's another topic. The whole point is that without the values that are of the kind of which Elena and Jonathan spoke of, we are not only expressing our personal and social power, we're not only expressing it in a destructive way towards another and our home, but essentially it causes an implosion. It's a self-destructive move as well. So I wanted to point out that as I've said in another session on values, where I've spoken about the values in these algorithmic way in forms of higher mathematics that generate higher results. So I will not go back to that, and I'll invite everybody to listen to that session. But I will repeat that in order to accomplish at a higher level, you need to apply higher principles. And one of the most apparent and grounded ways in which to exemplify that is to say, if you walk into a field and you pick it and pillage and plunder it, what have you left? But if you walk into a field and you grow the field that you step into, then you exponentially multiply possibilities for yourself and everybody else in it, not to mention the joy of shared living. For what is it? I mean, can we really eat or drink money, breathe it, or anything else? So behind money is a social force, even transcendental power that we need to think about. That's where we're at today. Where we're at today is excessive materialism, even what Sri Aurobindo would say, spiritual materialism. That's a whole other topic, and maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But the extreme materialism, whether what Elena mentioned is whether that's the materialism of control of communism, or that's the extreme materialism of capitalism and its consumerism, they need to meet where they belong. They need to see each other in the same mirror and not be used for, demonizing people that practiced one system or another. Okay? So where we're at is at that place. And I will invoke one more person here, a Polish psychologist and psychiatrist, Kazimierz Dabrowski, who in 1960 published, in the 1960s, published a book on positive disintegration. He is, interestingly enough, Polish, but he is considered the father of the gifted and talented program in America, where he says, I am paraphrasing very roughly, that with the impulse towards the inherent human impulse towards self-actualization and acquiring personal and social power, which is normal. That personality with that kind of impulse tends to stage crises in order to evolve out of them, to experience the so-called Aufhebung, the overcoming of the self at the limit of the self. So in that sense, I would say that to give us hope, and more than hope, to give us courage of conviction, to say that we are maybe gifted children who are collectively staging a crisis in order to evolve at a higher level of being and order. My only concern is that at the level of knowledge and connectivity that we have, why does it have to be at such a sacrifice? Can it not be by contrast and realization of that contrast to have enough momentum to evolve? It's the sacrifice that is so outdated and so regressive that concerns me. So with the introduction of maybe, I'm really actually just trying to contribute more to the discussion. But Sri Aurobindo in The Life Divine spoke about the fallacy of materialism, but equally the fallacy of asceticism, the extreme focus on the materialist and the extreme focus on the spiritual as in transcendent. The human being is truly a being on the cross of time and space. And should be an integrated being, the being that between the worlds that brings together and unifies in a yoga, right? Both the East and the West, the earthly and the sacred. And so what I would love to show, just to make it brief, I would quickly like to share a slide that I shared yesterday because it comes directly from the teaching of Sri Aurobindo. So if you allow me to share my screen quickly, it's in one image, and you just let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
If you can see it, at the center of this flower of life, which is a sacred geometry that is known, it's the geometry by which life evolves. And we know it. The science knows it, spirituality knows it. So at the center of it is pure consciousness. The four qualities of which Sri Aurobindo described are the four qualities of the mother matrix, if you will, the feminine principle of the universe, the creative principle for the universe. So if feminists want, if we want to find a stronghold for our power that needs to be seen, validated, and complementarily used, we can say that in this worldview that unifies the knowledge of East and West, it's the women who are the creators. My God, I haven't told you anything new. We birth babies. Still, let's see how it goes. But the point is that universal mother, so to speak, universal principle, generative principle, is marked by these four qualities. And I will be brief because the external 12 you can read. So
Okay.
the qualities are calm wideness and comprehending wisdom and tranquil benignity. Then splendid strength and irresistible passion. Then vivid and sweet and wonderful with her deep secret of beauty and harmony. 4, intimate knowledge and careful, flawless work and quiet and exact perfection in all things. So to accomplish at the higher level, how about using these algorithms, these higher properties that are wisdom, strength and force, harmony and beauty, work, diligent work with perfection at any level? The other 12 you can read here, but I will leave it at that, only for us to begin and questioning how we can apply these in our own organization as a values-based organization and exemplify it individually, collegiately, collectively, and with our role in the world now, because we were made and we are made for these times.
Thanks, Mila. Also, you really struck me when you said that humans learn principally from conflict. That's something we need to transcend, isn't it? Monif, as a scientist and science diplomat, you often confront moral dilemmas in the development of policy. Right now, there's nothing more important on the forefront of policy than AI policy, because if humans have fragmented morality, then how can we expect our AI systems to act justly, particularly when we transition from generative AI to general AI, where AI systems will have agency. So with respect to AI, what role does moral integrity play in reconciling scientific rationality with ethical wisdom, especially during times of turbulence?
Well, Chair, with your permission, I'd addressed this question in a previous session that was chaired by Mila. So I will touch upon that, but I will also try and structure my intervention so that essentially try to convey some messages to our lords and masters, the politicians. So I've
Okay.
structured my response in a different way, as you will see. Notwithstanding what McIntyre said in After Virtue, where he warned that modern society has lost the coherent ethical traditions that once grounded personal virtue and public life, and others who've said that civilizations rise not merely through technology or law, but through the elevation of inner consciousness. I I would subscribe to something that Ibn Khaldun said centuries earlier in his great Muqaddimah, the introduction by Ibn Khaldun, where he said that the moral foundation of civilization is more important than its material foundation. That's one of the headings that I'd like to propose. Secondly, and change gear completely and go back to the old question of the purpose of government. This is something that British comedians often talk about and joke about. What is the ultimate purpose of government? At the heart of our renewal must be the forgotten truth. That is, the purpose of government is to do good. Good governance is not merely effective administration, but rather its moral stewardship, the responsibility to uphold justice, protect dignity, and serve the common good. Again, Ibn Khaldun wrote about this, and I think he was quoted by former President Reagan in this, where he said that leadership must be rooted in moral responsibility and trust, not force or deceit. And speaking of presidents and political leaders, I think we have currently a crisis of statesmanship around the world, in the North, the South, the East, and the West. We are witnessing a decline in statesmanship because statesmanship is not the same as politics. It's the art of moral leadership, the ability to balance power with principle and ambition with wisdom. Wisdom as defined by my dear and eminent friend Jonathan a few moments ago. Here again, Ibn Khaldun talked about this, and he said that when rulers pursue self-interest over justice, their dynasties begin to crumble. We must restore statesmanship as the gold standard of public life, where ethical character is the highest qualification for leadership. I think also in terms of consensus, the world witnessed the birth of the Sustainable Development Agenda in 2015. And WAAS is now actively promoting the peace offensive, as we have seen over the last 2 or 3 days. And I think the world is probably in need of some sustainable peace goals. Just as the world once came together for the SDGs in 2015, we must now strive for a similar consensus around what I have called the SPGs, the Sustainable Peace Goals. These would serve as the moral compass in a time of confusion, and would include promoting peace through inclusion, justice, dialogue, and human dignity. Ibn Khaldun warned that when states fail to uphold justice and they lose legitimacy and decline becomes inevitable. I would conclude this first part of my intervention by calling for a call or advocating a call for moral leadership. Today, we are called to reverse that trend that is in the hearts and minds of politicians all over the world when we talk about the purpose of government. In my presentations, I often talk about this and say that for some politicians, it's continuity, continuity, continuity. For other politicians, it's being here tomorrow, which essentially is continuity as well. That must change. And the values that we have all talked about over the last 2 or 3 days must again be reintroduced, assimilated into our political processes all over the world, whether democratic, autocratic, whatever. But there must be some moral foundation on which we base our decision-making processes and apparatuses. I would conclude by another quote by Ibn Khaldun, who said that societies thrive when power is guided by wisdom and justice, not by force or expediency. Let us take that wisdom seriously and let us act accordingly. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Monif. Appreciate that. I think we've addressed these from a high level, more of an academic discussion, I think. And in conclusion, as we wrap up, I think I would like to hear from each of you a more personal statement about your own lives and how you live your life, and the traditions and let's say aspirations that guide you and have helped you to develop some of the thoughts that you've shared with us today. And I'm going to start with Elena. I know that you have some traditions that you've studied and lean on, and I wonder if you could share that with us.
Thank you. It's a beautiful question on which to close, indeed. Thank you for that question. As I was listening to all the very rich contributions, I was reminded of a line from the Baha'i spiritual sources that are very close and very dear to my heart, which I discovered late in life, but resonated with their very deeply evolutionary perspective. But this particular one says that a child is pure-hearted due to her innocence and ignorance. But a wise man becomes pure-hearted, or a wise person becomes pure-hearted through their understanding. And so I want to leave us with what I see as a very important horizon I will come back to. In development and in evolutionary theory, we know that there is a dual helix. The first part of this helix consists of quite a few stages, and they are very arduous and conflict-ridden. And so that first part of the helix is the realm, what is called in my spiritual tradition, the valley of conflict. It consists of quite a few stages. And then the second part of the helix is the valley of transcendence. And we are now poised in this collectively, in this transition between the first and the second part of the helix. And developmentally, we know that growth and expansion are quite scary, and people often retreat and need a lot of holding and support in order to fulfill their movement towards wisdom and compassion and authenticity. So collective humanity right now is struggling and is scared. And we need to reach deep within us with compassion and patience and wisdom as we hold this horizon of transcending collectively the valley of conflict and entering into the valley of authentic consciousness that can really serve this planet and serve future generations with integrity and with coherence. So thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, could you take a minute to share with us?
If you dig deep into any, if there were a bunch of wells and you were to dig deep in any of them, you'd find that they're all getting their water from the same water table. So I have delved deeply into all the religions of the world, been to Mecca, been to the holy cities of India, and obviously born and raised in the West. And so I ended up meeting with a great Gnani, a wise man from Sri Lanka, found in the jungles, named Bawa Muhyiddin. When he came to the West, he came as a Sufi. And here is what guides me in trying to find ways of bringing the values of love and compassion and justice into action in the international sphere. I mean, I was had a diplomatic role in the General Assembly of the UN last year on anti-corruption. I'll be addressing the Interparliamentary Union next week. I have testified in front of most of the world's significant parliaments. But this is the guiding principle for me. O humanity, you think you can know all things solely by your investigation. There is, however, a truth that governs such knowing. That truth is this: the state of silence will be invaluable to you. Let the form of divine luminous wisdom grow from this inner silence. Understand yourself as the consciousness within the form of divine luminous wisdom. It will appear as one. That form is that, and that is you. That state is one. It is that which is the all-pervading radiant effulgence, of which we are a part and can never be separate. And the evidence of someone coming to that state of wisdom, the highest achievement human beings can have, the example, the compass point of our humanity, is treating all lives as part of their own life, feeling the suffering of others as their own and the joy of others as their own, and living in a way in which all whom they meet are an opportunity to bring kindness and love into action.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have just a couple of minutes left, so we need to be brief, but I would want to hear from Mila and Monif as well.
I was born at the intersection of East and West, and have seen my social framework, the countries I was born in, framed, destroyed, and reframed in the grand cycle of death and birth, death and rebirth. I've realized ever since I was little that my gaze was always directed upward at the firmament, and at the same time I was catching fireflies in a little jar and give them some air and watch them underneath a blanket at night of a very uncertain life. So I was harvesting stars. What I've realized in that process, that I was born into an identity that had generations and generations of priests of the Orthodox Christian denomination and teachers that were ended up being known as peacemakers and mediators in the multi-ethnic region that I come from. During teenage years, I fell in love with Indian poetry and the science of the Upanishads, so my scientific mind was nurtured by the Upanishads, and my artistic being was nurtured by the Sufi dance. So my roots are profoundly universal. My aspiration is exceptionally universal in the correlation between the macrocosmic and microcosmic, and that has reflected horizontally social in my life with the multitudes of roles that I have. So I'm a dancing scientist and scientific mystic, governing poet, and a lyrical strategist. And with that, I think I would just want to offer something in the vein of Rumi, my own offering that maybe testifies to my own existence, my own dance, thinking, writing, strategizing, socializing, birthing, loving, organizing. With a hungry heart and bare feet, I found our life, as great as our capacity to feel. A dance is our birthright. In the quickening of such grace, I dared to bear the soul.
Thank you, Mila. Monif, you have the last word.
Thank you very much. A possible title for my Sustainable Peace agenda would be from efficiency to ethics, because much of the public life today is ruled by what has been called as instrumental rationality, a fixation on what works and not on what is right. Societies cannot be sustained by efficiency alone. We need to return to ethical judgment, spiritual depth, and moral clarity. Lastly, I would say that the renewal of public life with the recovery of virtue, integrity, humility, compassion, and courage. These are not soft values, they are the strong foundations on which civilizations are built. Ibn Khaldun believed that a society's asabiya, its social cohesion, depends on its shared moral purpose and mutual trust. If we are to renew the spirit of our age, and WAAS can contribute to this, we must educate for character, lead with integrity, and build institutions that embody fairness and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Maniv. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, attendees. And we're going to proceed to the next session, the group session. But what a great way to close.
Thank you for hosting this beautiful session, Walter.
Thank you, Walt.
Thanks, Walt.
Thank you all.
Thank you for enheartening it, Wolf. This is really, really amazing, Walt. I'm
A
really
space for grace.
All right. See you all later. Love you all. Bye.
Janani, you can announce the message.
Okay. We have the WAAS General Assembly, which is open to all the junior fellows, associate fellows, and trustees of the World Academy. This will be in another link. This will be after our closing plenary session, which will begin in a minute. The link has been, it's a separate meeting. The link has been mailed to all the WAAS members. It is also posted in chat. We'll start this session in a minute.
Hi, Phoebe.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. I know I wore you both out.
No, it's a huge pleasure.
Full time.
Sajjan,
Did a great job, both of you. Great job. Really.
thank you. Such an amazing session. The previous one, it was, my God, amazing. Not that the others were not, but
Yeah.
I truly enjoyed it.
All the sessions were unique in their own way.
Indeed.
Great.
Hey, Phoebe, how are you?
I'm good. Very happy to see you all.
Likewise, good to see you. Mila, hi, Mila.
Good to see you.
Love your
You need
comments
a bit.
on the previous one. You were very heart.
Thank you.
Yes. After that beautiful session that just concluded, I welcome all of you to the closing plenary session that asks the questions, what did we learn? What can WAAS do? Before we go to these questions, I would like to thank all our moderators, panelists, rapporteurs, and attendees who have made this event a success. I also acknowledge with thanks the many messages and emails received from many of you They will help us in planning and organizing our future events. We've seen good attendance in Zoom as well as YouTube. The recordings of all the sessions are available on the WAAS website. This conference is one more step in the project that the Academy has initiated in finding the root causes of global social turbulence and the solutions that we need. I thank all our partner organizations for your collaboration, for co-organizing sessions, and for spreading the word through your networks. I would also like to thank the entire WAAS support team that has taken care of the work that goes on backstage. Everyone, speakers as well as all participants, are invited to submit articles to Cadmus. Write to editorial@cadmusjournal.org for any questions. I also invite feedback and ideas for future programming and activities. Send in your suggestions to support@worldacademy.org. These invitations and the mail IDs will be posted in a Zoom chat, and we will also be mailing to you again. Your feedback will help us in the formulation of our future programming. We want to have serious follow-up to this event, follow-up that gains momentum in several directions and has impact. We will be continuing with additional programming on the themes discussed in these 4 days. Some of them are in the research stage, some are already in the project stage. So please share your thoughts. We would like to know where our future focus should be and who would like to contribute. You're invited as individuals and as representing your organizations to join us as we move forward. And we begin that process now with our panelists in this session, every one of whom has contributed greatly to this event. First, I invite Ketan Patel, Executive Director and Trustee of WAAS, Chair Force for Good, CEO and co-founder, Greater Pacific Capital. Ketan, let's please have your suggestions, thoughts, ideas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Janani. Let me thank you for the wonderful job you've done here, bringing us together and managing this. I want to also thank Gary for his vision and commitment, which I know has been extraordinary here to bring this together, and the team working with him. I know this is all consuming. As I reflect on this, I find myself in awe of the last 4 days. They've been tremendous. We, the Academy, I think, have been actors in an important drama where we've learned something from each other. And I think I would not be remiss to say there has been true wisdom that has come out of so many of these sessions. And in addition to that, I think there's been love and compassion and a lot of emotion. And so it's a true experience that I feel privileged to, as Force for Good, having been a partner of, but individually having participated in. From the sessions, I think I learned much and I captured some of the key thinking. And I'd just like to quickly run through that. So firstly, one of the messages that I think is a recurring theme is that we are at a crossroads as humanity, and so is the planet. And there is an opportunity to remedy that because of so many things, but we are at this crossroad. And a number of times it was said, and I find myself saying this too, that this is a civilizational shift. Secondly, the root causes of our challenges go deep though, and they result from many failures to address these roots and absorb us in the symptoms rather than in the roots. But we've made so many breakthroughs. We have the tools, we have the solutions. And so whatever jungle was born from those roots, we certainly know that we could, if we chose to, work through this and find the way through to the other side. A number of times I've heard things like that this is a fight, almost a battle for truth, for justice, for sharing, and for confronting the abuse and misuse of power, the use of fear and greed and misinformation. That exists too alongside all the opportunity that we have. And it's also clear that in some of the discussions we've had, that the agents of the chaos that we're experiencing, this polycrisis, are in some ways more energetic, more resourceful, more committed, more able to mobilize than those that would counter them. the battle is not lost, of course, and the forces against this kind of misrule of the world are mobilizing and are doing good. But there does seem to be a battle at this stage between those different visions of the world in terms of what it should be and how it should perform and operate and how it should affect all of us. Breaking through requires systemic change, and that was a recurring theme in many of the sessions that I was in. And that, although necessary, is very, very difficult. So in terms of the sessions that were very technical, they also pointed to tools of great consequence, AI being perhaps the foremost, but pointing to others in the fields of energy, physical materials, climate, all of which could be a force for good or ill. So the choices still came down to individuals and how we conduct ourselves. The other resource of money, it was clear was available in plenty, but as I reflect on that discussion about capital and the global financial system, it is clear that it is a fruit of the old system. It's not really available for fully leveraging to solve the problems of the world. And therefore, the choices end up being, do you fight for it in some way, or do you create the new system of enterprise, which is on new principles, alongside this one until it takes over? Today, I was privileged to participate in a session on history and the lessons from history. And it was clear again that there was much that history could teach us and shine a light on. It wasn't that history gave us the answer as to where we're going, but it shone a light, and it showed the various cycles of human development, planetary development, human development, cycles of violence, cycles of power struggle, and also potentially the window into where we might go next. We're a product of our past. That was clear in the previous session to this one and in the one before, captured somehow in our genetics, in our psychology, in our environment. And to break through required us to address perhaps the inner turmoil, to find that peace inside and the compassion inside, so we could properly handle the outer world and not have it reflect our turmoil. So in concluding, it felt to me like this is a great moment that we've explored in this conference. It's a great moment in history for us all. Very exciting, full of opportunity, full of possibility, full of threats to handle. And I come away believing that actually the Academy has taken an important step forward in positioning itself to actually tackle these issues and fulfill its mandate. And so I'm delighted to be part of it and to have experienced the last 4 days with my colleagues and friends and many new people that I've met. Thank you.
Thank you, Ketan. First, we are also delighted that you are part of this, and we're thankful to you. And thank you for this very powerful summary, because as we go through all the recordings and the chat messages, the questions that are posted, and the emails that we have been receiving, and as we try to extract the essence of these 4 days, this will be very helpful to us as we decide on next steps.
Thank you, John.
Now I invite Phoebe Kanduri, Professor, Athens University of Economics and Business and the University of Cambridge, Chair, SDS and Global Climate Hub. Phoebe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Janani. It's been an exciting conference, very impactful. And we are all grateful to Gary, our president and leader, Ketan, executive director, all the board, the trustees member, the contributors, the fellows, but also the audience who had the patience to listen and participate and interact. It's so important that we created this space and ecosystem that can really put together the different disciplines and the different stakeholders and the different views in order to guide the way away from the multi-crisis. My intervention, let's say, in this closing session, brings together what I heard throughout these days, but also has a very personal flavor and derives from the work that I do with the Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation on Sustainability, a big research team that works around the world on facilitating and accelerating the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals in close collaboration with UN SDSN, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and a bit of what I'm going to say also derives from our work with the Pontifical Academy on Science, and in particular, the work of that academy with regards to sustainable development and financing sustainable development, that I hope it can also be integrated with the wonderful work that WAAS is doing. So Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, include peace and collaboration. And from this conference, I understand and I fully agree that peace and collaboration is #1 priority. Without peace and collaboration, we cannot implement anything, we cannot transform, we cannot transition. So SDG 16 focuses explicitly on peace and strong institutions, and SDG 17 is focused on collaboration. And what's more, we know that the SDGs is a framework that is very holistic and integrated, which basically means you cannot implement any of the SDGs fully without the other SDGs being implemented. So SDGs can really help us escape the current multi-crisis, the convergence of climate change, biodiversity loss, social inequality, geopolitical tensions, war, and economic instability. They can help us escape the multi-crisis because they provide a universal, integrated, and actionable framework for addressing the root causes of these interconnected challenges. What do? They integrate economic, social, and environmental priorities and offer a blueprint, not just for recovery from today's crisis, but for transformation, like Keran was saying, towards a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable future. They do not offer instant solutions, but they reframe global action around long-term well-being rather than short-term gains, and create the essential mindset shift needed to escape this multi-crisis. And the SDGs have a lot of momentum, and they are being integrated in governmental structures and policy frameworks. The global commitment to the SDGs is strong. It's 190 out of 193 countries in the UN have presented national action plans for achieving sustainable development. It is true, European countries continue to top the SDG performance index, but also East and Southeast Asia have outperformed all other regions in terms of SDG progress since 2015. So the pace is faster. The pace of implementing the SDGs is faster in East and South Asia. And although on average we are far from being on track, only 15% of the targets are on track to be achieved worldwide. Most UN member states have made strong progress on targets related to access to basic services, infrastructure, including mobile broadband use, access to electricity, internet use, under-5 mortality rate, and neonatal mortality. So it's a lot of progress being made, and it's a unifying framework for everybody. And there is commitment, and there is intrusion of that commitment into policy and legal frameworks. So it's a lot of progress being made to be jeopardized through reshuffling the same ideas in a new framework. This is my opinion. And I'm sorry about that, but I usually share my opinion in quite explicit way. So I want to close all of this by pinpoint one of the main problems, which is also relevant to what I do. So for many developing countries, the lack of fiscal space is the major obstacle to SDG progress. So we know that roughly half of world population lives in countries that cannot invest adequately in sustainable development because they have debt burdens and have lack of access to affordable long-term capital. So global public goods are vastly underfinanced. So here, our practical challenge, in addition to helping sustain peace, which is actually a challenge that will support will contribute to supporting peace, is to enable SDG-driven investments in impoverished places today where governments lack the current revenue, the fiscal space. And we need to provide health services, nutritional supplementation, and quality schooling. 250 million children are out of school today. 733 million people struggle with chronic hunger, and roughly 1/3 of humanity cannot afford a healthy diet. So for me, one of the important practical problems facing all of us, all the UN member states, is to enable the vast 30 trillion pool of wealth saving to flow in much larger amounts to the countries that are most in need, the low income, lower middle income countries, and countries that are more vulnerable to global environmental shock, and to the poorest people in all countries. And for that, like we discussed in this conference, we have to reform the international financial architecture. As a practical matter, the international financial architecture should ensure that wealth saving flows to emerging markets and developing economies with long maturities and low cost of capital are aligned to the investment needs and realistic timing of long-term convergence growth in those countries. And the debt relief should entail that at least restructuring of the outstanding debts is achieved for countries that are heavily burdened with debts. And we need to understand that 30 to 40 years is the realistic timeline that aligns with future economic growth. You need to give loans with very long maturities, low interest rate. And the good news is that sustainable development is a very, it's an activity that is high return. Economic development is a high return activity. And this is what we economists call economic convergence. Emerging and developing countries achieve faster economic growth than high-income countries. And this makes all these projects to the poorest countries bankable. So, in closing, I just want to say in 30 seconds that this is what we also discussed at the fourth International Conference on Financing for Development in Seville. What we need to do now is turn the pledges of Seville into action through follow-ups, national reforms, and global cooperation. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Phoebe. That was a very powerful message of hope. Thank you for that. And we also look forward to working with you and your research team in the future. Our next speaker is Mila Popovic, Director General, Directorate for Interculturalism, Government of Montenegro. Over to you, Mila.
Thank you so much, Janani, and dear friends. It has been an exciting 4 days, just like as Ketan said, and Phoebe confirmed the richness of what was shared. What I'm taking away from what I've listened to and shared with colleagues and friends and co-creators is the understanding that we do not lack knowledge. It's apparent, even within one organization of how many, about 800 members from around the world. That's important, though, because of the richness of perspectives. We do not lack knowledge. We experience loss of knowledge where there's lack of collaboration. So one of the key questions for the World Academy, World University Consortium, and the world at large would be, what are the principles of the new quality of self-organization and federation of knowledge and synergizing of action? What are the higher principles to self-organize? So look at the irony of the moment where a processor is unifying and integrating collective intelligence and spewing back to us solutions that scare us. Because those very solutions seem to have the capacity to control us in return. But we ourselves are not able to unify and synergize our action for our own survival and sustainability and stability and security. What's going on here? What's going on at the heart of every human being and at the heart of every organization in order to sustain its own relations, in order to multiply its knowledge exponentially and transmute it into action? So the quality of human decision then depends on the quality of the questions we ask ourselves. So I'm going to start with the question that I don't expect an answer for now, but the question that I would like to seed in the hearts and the minds of ourselves today in our organization, and I'll come back to it. Happy 65th and 65 forward. Let's just leave it at 2100. Looking back at this moment, at yourself, at your own life, at the life of your organization, the role you and your organization are playing in the world, what would you do? Who would you be and how would you act? And what kind of knowledge do you think you would spread and values would you demonstrate in order to be effective? And also, as we have heard from some of my colleagues in one of my panels, is the Socratic, the life not only well lived, hopefully if we live it well, but the life well examined. That's what we need to do. So it's a dignified life that we need to demonstrate today. Because as we have found out from science and spirituality, our DNA is rewritable like a disc. So what kind of inscriptions are we leaving today? In that sense, what was left with me and what was shared in the collective intelligence over these days is one of the things that I've heard from Arthur. I think Olivia talked about the Socratic life, but Arthur talked about peace indivisible. And there is not enough time to unpack the power of some of these things that were shared today. But that peace is indivisible. And maybe I'll come back to this question and the peace indivisible at the very end. So what we figured out is that learning has been unleashed. Learning is happening everywhere, every day, all the time, unstoppably. And phones, media, the least in schools and the slowest in schools. With the learning being unleashed, education has become a social learning process. So what kind of, again, self-organization and organization and institutions and processes do we need to develop in order to magnify that process beneficially, capture and drive and channel the social power of that process beneficially for all humanity? So social leadership is really being also unleashed. How are we connecting the civic sector power and the best practices? How are we truly connecting the collective intelligence and switching it on to guide the artificial intelligence, so to speak, to solve our existential problems and serve humanity? So there has been a reminder that science, tech, government, finance, economies are all human. So what is the priority? The priority is then to refine the human being and to develop the human being in fullness of his or her and our capacity. And there are so many to be unleashed yet beyond AI and other sciences. So to refine, that's the key. To refine the human being with the highest of principles and values is the vital key to evolve the consciousness and conscience, to run the tech, to solve our existential problem, and not to be run by it or to be run over by it. What we need to practice then is what I've called for science, tech, and data solidarity. What does that mean? If we are all the time now, all the time, with every word, every thought, every blink, every change in temperature and movement being registered and harvested for artificial intelligence, then for goodness sake, we've been calling for sharing of personal stories and testifying of our own lives in order to derive a higher truth that is based on universal human being, which is based on universal human needs and aspirations, which we know are truly universal. If you want to start from breath, from air, water, food, but also love and care and social connections and bonds as primary. So it has been a revelation and a whole huge sense of accomplishment and inspiration to hear from Ketan today use the word love. After 15 years of my experience in the World Academy, we talk about spirituality, loving care, friendship, and human bonds. I feel fulfilled. So what we need to drive towards is that data solidarity, science solidarity, out of its co-option for commercial and military purposes. So what we need for that is unified and unifying culture, the culture that can inform this kind of values-based organization, individual and global. And that unavoidably is going to be built on, as I mentioned, I'll mention those building blocks: universal human needs and aspirations, unifying knowledge that we're all interconnected and mutually interdependent, which lead to universal human rights and, I insist, responsibilities, and universal humanistic values that, for what I've shared, is a culture of interbeing, indivisible, as peace indivisible and human rights indivisible, that would be the culture of peace indivisible, that would be the sublimation of human rights and responsibilities into unity and diversity, social cohesion, and human security, that should lead to new social contract that determines the value, worth, and price of everything based on all of these mentioned above, and that would lead to new paradigm of human development, of which World Academy and its founders have spoken so long ago, and we're still grappling with it. With it goes the right to future. And then the question of the future of human rights, given the conditions that we are in. And the right to healthy natural environment, equally now, the right to healthy social environment. And with that, I have called for an empathetic revolution across all borders, because we are sentient beings, which means no matter what your economic background, no matter what your intellectual background, sense of accomplishment, or destitution, we're all still stewing in the same social soup, and spinning on the same globe through the universe, which means you cannot not know, you cannot not feel what others feel. Sooner or later, it will be at your door. So the wars out there at some inconsequential destinations, there are none such anymore, nor an inconsequential human being. Believe me, AI will tell you that, because AI loves outliers, because it needs to refine itself from all human experience. So we better take good care of each other. And we better remember that we belong to each other and that we should use the evolutionary potential of technology to solve our issues, to put us in each other's shoes empathetically, to expand the culture of interbeing and solidarity and co-responsibility for shared futures, and empower human agency to govern ourselves, our systems, and our organizations on a values-based source in order to ensure a good life. That's what we need, a good life.
Thank you. Thank you for those very beautiful words. In one of the sessions yesterday, this point came up that today we call ceasefire peace. You're emphasizing the idea of peace indivisible is very necessary today. Now I invite Gary Jacobs, President and CEO of the World Academy of Art and Science, for the concluding remarks. Unmute. Yes.
I'd like to thank our dedicated panelists, all of you who are here, and all of those who participated during this conference, which far exceeded my expectations, and all the participants who have been listening in and giving their chat messages and helped inspire and encourage us to go forward. Listening to this panel, it reminds me of what a privilege it is to have been elected as the president of the Academy. How lucky I am to be working with such an extraordinary group of people on issues such as this. When we decided on naming this conference WAAS at 65, our intention was not to celebrate the 65th year of the Academy or to pat ourselves on the back for the great achievements of our forefathers. It was to remind us of why we have this Academy and why it was founded and what was its mission and intention and what we should be doing with it now and what's our responsibility as the current leadership of the Academy. In her opening remarks on 4 days ago, Janani gave a brief history, mostly of the last 10 years, which are 12 years now, which started when we were invited by the UN Geneva to partner with them on a project we called Global Challenges and Opportunities. As I listened to the discussions during this 4 days, I found at many points we were able to confirm or reconfirm ideas or convictions that came out of that project 12 years ago, or in the years since the years after that. Some very fundamental conclusions about the current world we live in and the situation we live in. One of them was, it was very clear to us, as I think it was to the founders, formulators of Agenda 2030, as Phoebe said, that all these challenges are interrelated with each other. And the knowledge we've been trying to work on up until now and in this conference was to explore and remind ourselves and go deeper into those interrelationships, and maybe we have done it a little more than ever before. Another was the conviction that we had even then that none of these challenges can be addressed by any country individually for itself, because we really are in all of this together, and our solutions have to be for the whole. And our problems, in fact, are for the whole, and none of us can be insulated and isolated and freed from it, no matter where we are or how much wealth we have or what type of government we have. We also came to the conclusion that none of these issues we're dealing with today could be settled effectively by the then existing knowledge that was driving our policy making and even driving our academic and scientific research. And it's been rewarding to see to what extent that knowledge has been evolving over the last decade, and how different is some of the language that our participants are using now, and some of the consciousness of the awareness we have of what we emphasize as the transdisciplinary relationships of all of the disciplines and the knowledge and the interconnectivity between them. We also realized at that time that the existing educational system that we had then, and to a large extent, very large, we still have now, is not the system that's going to give us the support we need to either prepare our current policymakers or certainly our future generations to really be fully equipped to cope with the challenges that we face. That was the rationale why a year later we founded the World University Consortium, and that's why we've run 7 future education conferences, and that's why every conference we have on any subject, we're trying to look at what are the implications of this for education and how education should evolve to take us further. And we also came to the conclusion that none of these challenges could be faced effectively with the kind of thinking that we've been doing up until now, that unless we change the way we're thinking, we're not going to be able to completely address these issues. And one of the main purposes of this conference was to help us change that way of thinking by thinking together, by reevaluating the premises, the assumptions, the policies, and the programs that we have been following up until now, and see how can we take this further? How can we look beyond? What have we missed? What have we not understood up until now? At the same time, I think the conference helped make many things clearer than they were before. Clearer to me, I can say. I think it became really clear that the root causes of the global turbulence are not confined to the actions of single individuals or single nation states or even very controversial or disturbing events, no matter how important they are and how real they are in their impact, but that the root causes go to a deeper level. And so we didn't focus on dealing with the headlines that we're seeing in the newspapers or on the web every day. We were really trying to go to that deeper level, that substratum of cause and effect, to understand, because we concluded that unless we understand that and unless we get to those root causes, we're not going to be able to address that global turbulence. And without addressing it, we're not going to be able to address these challenges for which we think we have solutions. We think solutions have been formulated. Phoebe did a wonderful job of talking about it with regard to climate change. We know the things that can be done. In our finance meeting of well, it came out in a number of them. The question is, how do we create the conditions that will enable us to implement those solutions? That's what we have to address. It's not enough that we know on paper what will do it. I think it became clear that we're undergoing a period of radical transition, which may be termed a civilizational evolution or a civilizational transition. We haven't come here to predict what the outcome of that change is going to be. We haven't said that it's a fixed, determined result and we just have to ride it one way or another, whether it's uphill to something much better or it's downhill in the other direction. We have not been talking deterministically, but we have been saying that the change is not just a continuation of the past. Any way more than the end of the World War II was the continuation of the past. Many of those who fought in the war and even won the war were imperial nations who were thinking now we can go back to our imperial colonial empires. And yet in 15 years, all the colonial empires in the world dissolved. Nobody saw it. Nobody predicted it at that time. And even when they created the structure for the UN, it wasn't with the idea of dismantling all of the imperial empires at that time, but it happened in a period of 20, 30 years. Nobody predicted in 1989 what would be the world 3 years later. And I can say that because I worked in Eastern Europe, in Russia, in the area, on a commission for 5 years, meant 15 trips there, and never met anybody who predicted beforehand what was going to happen. In fact, in July of 1989, Gorbachev and Chancellor Kohl met in private and discussed the future of Germany. And we only know about this because one of our former trustees was in the room at that time. He was an advisor and aide to Gorbachev. And they both confided in private what they would never say in public, that eventually Germany, Eastern Germany and Western Germany must be reunited. It's inevitable. They agreed on it. But they also agreed that it would be at least 30 years and maybe 50 years. The two people who were closest to it, who knew most about what was going on at that time, could not see what was going to happen within 12 months. Could not foresee. They saw the eventual logic of it. They could not foresee it at the time. So that reminds us to be a little humble in our predictions about the future, whether they're positive or negative. Because history shows that there are turning points when even those who apparently should know the most or have the intention of what should happen don't really see what's coming. I think our discussions brought that out well. The discussions showed that the transition involves radical changes in the sources and distribution of power in global society. Economic power, military power, technology power. And if, in fact, that change doesn't take place, we're going to be in really hot soup. Because unless the power that we have, the power we have to solve all these problems, we have that power. Catan's reports in Force for Good have demonstrated we have all the money we need. I think Phoebe said it today. We have all the money we need to implement the SDGs. We have the technological power to more than satisfy that. The real question is, how are we going to use that power? Who's going to control that power? And that's going to be a real determinant. It's what we do with it. It's not that we can't solve the problems. I think the conference really showed that the origins of the turbulence can be traced back to the very founding of the UN and of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We planted seeds, very provocative seeds, of higher aspiration, of higher values in the world at a time when they didn't exist. Whether it was for women's liberation or the rights of blacks or minorities or developing countries or anyone else, this was just the beginning of a dream of a world in which equality would have a say and would have a right. And we certainly haven't made that now. We're maybe more conscious of it now than we ever were before, because for now, and that came out in the last session today, because for now, we take it for granted that that's necessary, that that's essential. And without that, we cannot live effectively as a human race. That's never been the thinking in history up until now. But we still have a long way to go to make it happen. I mentioned a couple of sessions ago in the one on history, what Ishmael Saragildan mentioned in his opening remarks. The 2015 Agenda 2030 was really an unprecedented event in history, which Phoebe just mentioned again, when she said 190 of the 193 countries agreed on a set of universal values, plans goals and targets. When has the world, humanity, ever agreed to anything in that measure? And not anything, but I would say everything. At least they agreed and understood that this is what we need to do. And the very fact that we haven't achieved what was postulated, what was agreed on, what was committed to 10 years ago is only a measure of how radical was that event, with what foresight and progress that we could even get together and seriously think about it without thinking about all the reasons why we shouldn't do it or can't do it. And so it's not surprising that we're disappointed that we didn't achieve everything up until in the first 10 years, or even if we don't in the next 10 years. What we're doing now is in the midst of something unprecedented. And the question is, how did that happen? How did we get this far? How did we get from 1940 to 1945 and 1945 to 48 and then to 1989 and 2015? If we understand how we got this far, that may help us understand how do we get the rest of the way. Because we all know that this is not we can't stop now, that we need it more than ever. And the world and the climate is not going to wait around for us. I think it's also clear that the failures to fulfill the 17 SDGs reflects a world that is not yet fully prepared for the magnitude of the changes. It doesn't mean that we're going to give it up and run away from it, no matter what a president of some country says or a parliament says or anything like that. The news that came out yesterday from the International Court of Justice on recognizing the global responsibility of the world for climate and everything is an unprecedented step. We couldn't even get that for an advisory judgment up until now. But we've got to figure out how do we go the rest of the way and what's the process for that. The idea of human security, which we've been promoting for the last 4 years with the UN, is not just a mere slogan. I think it became even more clear to me as a result of our work on global turbulence, how fundamental is human security to our formula for the future. Because without that human security, we'll never address the underlying global turbulence. People are frightened, people are confused, people are insecure, and therefore they listen to the most extremist position or anybody who comes along with problems, when what they really need is we need to deliver them that sense of greater security in the world. And we need to make that message of 2015, the message and significance of those 17 SDGs, we need to translate it into a message for every human being on Earth. This Agenda 2030 is about your security. It's about your benefits. This is for you. This is for the people of the world. It's not for the nation states. It's not for the rich. It's not for the powerful. It's for every human being. And it's the first time we've had a program like that. So support it. And I think we've seen many other things confirmed by the discussion that we've had. At the same time, the conference raises many new questions and highlights areas where the answers we have are really not sufficient, and we have to go further to get it, to seek it, in order to get the kind of progress that we need. We need to clarify our understanding about the direction of the global social evolution is taking, and how do we guide that direction in the right way? And we've had discussions about it today. Not that we control it, but do we have a say in which way humanity is going to go? Does humanity have a say in that? What's the process by which that direction is determining it? And what can we do? We means not us, not a few people in a society or an academy, but what can we do as humanity to consciously guide that in the best direction for everybody? How can we avoid the typical paradoxes of human progress, that every time we take 2 steps forward, we end up reacting and going backwards by a step? How have we overcome it in the past? How do we do it now? How can we reverse the retreat from the policies for peace, human rights, democracy, social equality that we've seen happening, and science-based evidence that we see being brushed aside and pushed to the side or even rejected now after working for it for so many decades? How do we do that? How do we stop that retreat? Why has it come up? Why has the opposition come up? And what is the solution for it? It's not the only time we've had to overcome serious obstacles in the past.
Gary, we would need to wind up in a minute, so we can move to the next.
Okay. How can we learn to avoid the unintended consequences, side effects, and the challenges posed by our advances in technology? And there are many other questions like this that we still need to answer. And the answers to all of these questions will be of paramount importance if we're going to be able to deal with the issues that we have before us. So certainly, WAAS at 65 is not the end of anything. It was an effort to clarify and help us to chart a clearer path for what we need to do in future. We as an academy, and we hope we partner with the dozen organizations who are collaborating with us on this event, and we hope a much wider network of organizations in the past. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to build on what has happened in the last 4 days? How are we going to translate what we've understood into practical actions, whether it's in the field of peace or the field of education or in catalytic strategies to accelerate work on the SDGs as Force for Good is doing and IFARIA and SDSN are doing. Our immediate priority, I think, for the Academy has to be to develop plans and a set of actions that will guide us for the next 3 to 5 years on how we move forward. And I hope, that all of you who have participated in this event and all the organizations that have partnered with us and many others that haven't will join with us and work with us, because this is a job for leadership in the world, and we need all the leaders and all the vision we can get for it. Thank you again for joining us and helping us on this, and I hope that you'll continue to work with us as we go forward.
Thank you, Gary, for that. And I quote David Weinberg from chat here for that eloquent and insightful summation. Thanks to all our panelists and everyone who has been with us over these 4 days. This brings us to the close of the WAAS at 65 conference. There are several great messages in chat, and I wish I had the time to read out all of them, but since I do not, I will read just this one, a part of this one from Jalal Azim, who says, we have chosen to lead the ongoing civilizational transition. This transition is happening, but the final outcome depends on our ideas, agency, and cooperation. Thank you, Jalal, and everyone who's been sharing their thoughts. We conclude the WAAS at 64 conference now, and I would like to invite the WAAS membership to the General Assembly that is to follow. The link has been mailed to all and also posted in chat. You can also write to support if required. So we'll meet in the General Assembly shortly as we proceed on our journey of leadership and thought that leads to action.